podcast land, back to another episode of Different Strings, a guitar adjacent podcast. I'm your host, Wes, along with my good friend and other host, Andy. Say hello, Andy.
Hello.
Fantastic. This week, we are going to take on what may end up being the most controversial topic we have taken on since we first conceived of this concept that is
Ooh.
Different Strings, a guitar adjacent podcast. We are going to talk about supergroups.
Supergroups sounds like
Supergroups.
an absolutely stellar breakfast cereal.
It does. But before we do that, Andy, please tell everyone where they can find us on the internet.
Again? All right. Kids, why don't you go to venture over, if you will, to differentstringspodcast.com, because guess what? I've been updating the website. That's correct. I
What?
finally got off my lazy ass and I actually updated the website. So now you have a reason to go. You're welcome. Differentstringspodcast.com, please and thank you. And you're welcome. Back to you,
Now, I
Wes.
understand. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. I understand that we have a little bit of housekeeping to do before we jump into putting our opening act on stage.
We do. So, Wes, apparently you and I engaged in a little bit of a misinformation.
Okay.
Okay. We recently did an episode where we said that Dave Murray from Iron Maiden used a Kemper profiler. And I swear, I
Yeah,
continue to swear.
he says, or his guitar tech said that they set it to the JMP1, Marshall JMP1 channel, and then run it into a Marshall power amp, and they just take that from gig to gig because it's what he uses.
Well, someone by the name of at Marcus Maynor, Marcus Maynor 1568. That must be
Wow,
the
he's
year he
old.
was. Yeah, that's a really wait. So that means there was 1,567 Marcus
Other Marcus
Maynors.
Maynors.
Yeah. Um, he comments on our video. Hi guys. Dave doesn't use a Kemper profiler. Up until 2022, he used a Marshall JMP1 preamp through the power amp of a JCM 2000, and he changed it to an Axe-Fx for the last tour, which I'm assuming is, 2023. So this
Well,
person is saying he didn't use a Kemper, but he used a JMP1 preamp, like the actual preamp. And
gotcha.
I tell you, I looked it up and I couldn't find any information about him ever using a Kemper, even though I swear that he was using a Kemper on the JMP1 preamp profile, but now I can't
Yeah.
find that information anywhere. So
Well,
sounds
and
like he switched to
I'm
an Axe-Fx anyway.
I'm looking at two different websites that both say he uses the Fractal Axe-Fx.
Mm-hmm.
And one his guitar tech Colin Price says the Axe-Fx is only being used to replicate the JMP1, and the other is Fractal's website,
Mm-hmm.
or at least and it shows the video, and it's, you know what, Marcus, thanks for calling us out.
Yeah.
We got a detail wrong, and we apologize.
We're
So
nothing if not um, accountable, right?
yeah, so if you want to see the video for yourself, it's called Iron Maiden Davies Rig, and that's spelled DAVEY' rig. And
Okay.
then but Adrian uses the Kemper.
Ah, okay. We're not completely crazy because I believed at one point I thought they were all using Kempers, but maybe not.
Yeah, clearly we we muff we muffed it up again.
We biffed it. Okay.
Not the
So
first time,
no,
and
and it
won't be
won't
the
be the
last time.
last. That is correct. Okay. Now, housekeeping out of the way, Wes, I have a
But
question for you. Oh, go ahead.
okay, hit me. I was going to say, was Marcus cool about it when he sent in his message?
Yeah, I almost read his correction word for word. He was very polite about it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Marcus, for not being a dick about it.
Yeah,
I
we're
really
stick,
appreciate I really appreciate that.
yeah, sticking to the spirit of our show, which is inclusivity and just treat each other nicely. So
Except for what we're about to do with our headliner.
seriously. Okay, so but they're professionals and millionaires. They can handle a little criticism.
Yeah.
Um, so Wes, you know that I have been fascinated with the Reddit subreddit called R Guitar, right? I've told you this recently.
Right.
All right. I
Yes.
am fascinated um because I read questions that people are posting, and it honestly it takes me back to when you and I, well, it takes me back to when I was just a hatchling playing guitar, brand new, didn't know a darn thing about it, and I didn't have the benefit of the internet to ask these burning questions.
How old were you when you played your first live gig?
Ooh, 15 at USA Roller Skating Rink.
Nice.
And
I think I might have been 16,
I played
but
with
it
my
right
back to
so
the crowd the entire time.
uh I did
Nerves.
not. I played at Chrissy's pool party. I can't remember Chrissy's last name, but it was a very distracting gig because of all of the age appropriate girls at the time. Remember, I was 16
Mhm.
running around in skimpy swimsuits. Um, so maybe that helped with some of my nervousness.
Hmm. I
But
don't know.
I just remember desperately trying not to fall into the pool while I had my guitar on.
Oh, yeah. So, I saw this question and I decided to like expand on it a little bit because I have been in this exact situation many times, at least a few times, and did not really know what to do about it. So I'm going to ask you, Wes, when it comes to playing guitar live and
Mhm.
outside in extreme temperatures, extreme cold or extreme heat, what are some tips? So, what are some good cold weather tips? What are some good warm weather tips? And let's just assume, for the purpose of this question, that it's not like I'm going to go out there, play a song or two, and I'm done. Like this is an extended set.
An actual set, yeah.
Yeah, and either a set or a many sets, which in my situation, it was many sets. It was outside in freezing cold all morning and early afternoon, and it was really cold. I broke multiple string. I don't want to get into what happened. I broke multiple strings because of the
Clearly
freezing cold.
this is imprinted on you.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, I have also been in the hot weather situation. And so I have some tips, but I wanted to see for, I guess, cold weather first. Have you been in a situation like this? What was the
Yeah,
situation and what tips do you have?
I've played outdoors in both hot and cold, and maybe the biggest tip I have is good for both of them, whether it's hot or cold. And it involves you should I would advise use a solid body guitar. Don't use a
Mm,
hollow or semi-hollow guitar. Don't
okay.
even use a chambered guitar,
Hmm.
and put it out on a stand at least 30 minutes before you need to play it.
Okay. And
Because
what? Yeah.
what'll happen is the guitar will take on the temperature of the air,
Hmm.
and then it will stay in tune better.
Okay.
Now, of course, its temperature is going to change once you start playing it.
Hmm.
But if you take a guitar out of the dressing room or the green room, or even just the case, and walk up to your microphone and start playing, that guitar is going to acclimate as you're playing it, and it will go horribly out of tune,
Hmm.
especially if you're using a double locking trem system.
Mm.
So I would say don't use a floating trem if you can avoid it,
Hmm.
and put the guitar out in the air at least 30 minutes before you need to play it.
Mm. I did none of those things.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I mean, this is how we learn our lessons, right? We make mistakes,
mhm.
And then, but I think that's the only one that I have that would apply to both.
I thought taking it out of the case too soon would be bad for it. I thought keeping it in the case as long as possible till I had to play it made sense, right? I don't want it outside in the freezing cold. That's where I am and I'm uncomfortable. Why would I want my
Right.
guitar out there? So I took it out of the case, started playing it, and it was going wildly out of tune, but also breaking strings. Um,
Yeah, that's uh, until the last maybe 10 or 15 years, maybe 10 years. I broke strings all the time anyways.
mhm.
So I wouldn't really know if the temperature affected me breaking strings because I broke strings all the time.
Yeah. So we played a gig. It was the original band, and we were playing along the path of a charity run.
Okay.
And for those of you familiar with Philadelphia, it was along the Schuylkill River, and it was
How's that
freezing.
how's that spelled, Andy?
Um, Fuck. Um, it was bitter, bitter, bitter cold outside, and I the band only had like a small. We didn't have a large repertoire, and we were supposed to be outside like all day in the
Yeah.
morning and then in the early afternoon until the race was over, till the run was over. So we basically played the same maybe 10 songs 10 times. Okay. I'm the only guitar player
Naturally.
breaking breaking strings like constantly.
Yeah.
Um, and the guitar going out of tune. So half the day I spent tuning the guitar, and the other half I spent changing strings and then retuning it all day. This was a PRS 2000, like an early 2000s custom 24, which
Mm-hmm.
under normal circumstances was a very stable instrument, but not that day. And I really struggled. And I also struggled with just playing because it was just so cold. I just didn't even want to have my fingers out in the air. And it was bad. It may have been the worst
Yeah.
situation I've ever been in.
I would take a hot outside gig over a cold outside gig any day. I don't basically, I should back up. My biggest tip is don't take outdoor cold weather gigs, right? Just don't
Uh-huh.
do it.
Don't do
You
it.
know, unless they're offering you a huge amount of money or you're already famous
Yeah.
and you're contractually obligated. I wouldn't do it again,
They make those pocket warmers now. I
Yeah,
think
that's true. Those you squeeze them and they warm up.
yeah, I think
And
that would have
that's
helped me that day.
yeah, maybe if you could hold it between your hand and the neck, you know.
While you're
I
playing.
mean the string side, the fret side.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't enjoy cold weather. And so for cold weather, if you're like me, if you're using a tube amp,
Oh.
you know, again, leave it outside and let it acclimate and then turn the power on. And normally you're supposed to turn the power on, wait about 30 seconds for the charge to build up, and then hit the standby switch.
Hmm.
I would let it warm up for probably a good 3 to 5 minutes in
Hmm.
that situation,
Hmm.
and then turn it on, and then wait again before playing it to let it stabilize.
I think you're just asking for trouble in extreme cold.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Um,
you're probably in more danger of something going wrong with your tubes from them cooling down too fast than
mm,
heating up,
okay.
right? Because they're made to play hot
Yep.
and the amp is going to heat up. But then when you turn it off at the end of the gig, that's when I would be the most worried about something damaging the tubes is as it
Hmm.
cools off much more quickly than it's used to.
Yeah.
Um, for hot weather stuff, I wouldn't worry about the tubes. I would point a fan at the back of my amp
And you.
just to well, yeah, I would also point a fan at my face, but I would definitely point a fan at the back of my amp just to get that air moving around
Hmm.
so that, at least something is pulling the heat away.
Yeah.
Uh, but hot weather, outdoor gigs, most of my suggestions are for the person, right?
Yeah,
Don't
stay
black.
hydrated.
Yes, drink tons of water. And as a matter of fact, don't drink tons of water. Drink an adequate amount of water, which is probably about 16 to 20 ounces an hour. Because you only absorb so much water. If you sit down and you drink 1 gallon of water at 3 o'clock and nothing else that day,
Not going to work.
it's not going to help, right? But drink water and like um put electrolyte powders in your water.
Hmm.
Gatorade has a lot of sugar in it. Those kind of
Yeah.
drinks have a lot of sugar, not great. But if you could have some electrolyte, Pedialyte, which tastes terrible but does a great job. Um, and don't get drunk, don't drink a lot of alcohol.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
That's really bad for you
Oh
because
yeah.
it dilates or it changes the size of your blood vessels and makes it harder for you to shed heat. um Wear a hat that's not solid cloth, wear like a trucker hat,
Sunscreen.
sunscreen,
Yeah.
yeah, and try
Even
and
if
don't.
it's cloudy, people always like, oh, it's
Oh yeah,
cloudy. The sun, mm-mm. It's not the visible light that fries you.
yeah, it's the UV rays.
Yep.
And true story, I didn't play in a band, I worked for a band, I was their instrument tech, and they had an outdoor gig in DC, 4th of July, and it was balls hot. I mean, it was gross hot.
Hmm.
And this is a power trio, and the singer slash guitar player was a kind of a goth dude. So he's wearing black pants, black jeans, all the way down to his ankles. He's wearing probably Doc Martens or some other kind of black leather boot. He's wearing a black t-shirt. He's pasty white skin. So I think my memory says he was even wearing a long sleeve shirt,
Oh
which
no.
is not in and of itself a terrible thing. He didn't drink, so he did have that going for him, but he didn't eat very much that day and he didn't drink very much water. And about 2 minutes after he stepped off stage, they played a 30-minute set. He passed out.
Wow.
Now obviously we got an ice pack, we cooled him off, we gave him some water. He came right back around and he was fine. But you have to really be careful of heat exhaustion
Hmm.
because it can turn into heat stroke, and
Very
that's
quickly.
bad.
Yep. Yep.
Heat stroke will put you in the hospital. Heat stroke can kill you.
Hmm. Yep. And severe sunburn also,
Miserable,
and
miserable.
it creeps up on you because you'll be out all day and be, oh look, I'm fine, and then get home and it'll just,
Mhm.
yeah, it's bad news. Um, Also, depending on where that gig is, insect repellent.
Yeah,
So,
and
uh,
I can tell you from experience, if you're using sunscreen and insect repellent,
mhm.
test it on a small patch of skin first, just in case you
Uh-oh.
have just in case you have a reaction.
Why, West?
Well, because if you cover yourself with sunscreen like a good boy, and then the mosquitoes come out and you spray yourself with insect repellent, you could suddenly start itching like that's your job. And it's really difficult to play guitar
And
and scratch your arms and face at the same time.
yeah, that's not good.
So in that case, I would suggest spraying the insect repellent on your clothes
Mm. Hmm.
instead of your skin,
No, it's
and
good
just
advice.
dealing with the mosquito bites on your neck for a little while.
Yeah. I know people that spend a lot of time outdoors, fishing, hunting, that sort of thing. And the really high end, like the mean stuff, the insect repellent, like the industrial strength stuff that they
Yeah,
use, they tell you it goes on the clothes, not the body. Like just don't
right.
even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So
and
cold weather tips, don't do it. Hot weather tips, just say a few prayers.
yeah, take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Basically, pretend like you're engaging in a high effort outdoor sport
Hmm.
in the middle of summer. Wear a hat of some sort because your head will get sunburned even if you have hair.
Hmm.
And that is no fun. and
Nope.
and especially, not only does it hurt, but then it starts to peel. Oh, I remember having hair and having a sunburn on my head and
Mm-mm.
having it heal.
Mm.
And it was one of the least fun things I've ever done. So
I just don't.
yeah,
I
I
just
agree. Cold weather, don't do it. Hot weather, be really careful
the
and
things we
hydrate.
do for this hobby of ours.
Sometimes it just ain't right. Sometimes it just ain't right.
If you're watching, if you're not watching, Wes is just shaking his head ruefully. Like one of these days, I know we've told horror stories. It's bringing back the gigs I've said yes to for a little bit of exposure. It's never even about the money. It's always like
No.
the expo. You're gonna you
Wait,
think you're
you get paid?
yes for playing Sweet Home Alabama and American Girl, but when you're playing original music and you think you have a shot at getting famous, you take gigs for exposure and the things
Yeah.
you'll do for exposure. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. So speaking of exposure, I'm going to let you introduce and tee up this next topic because you really sold it up front. That you really hyped it
I
up.
did. I did. And we're going to talk about supergroups, our favorites and some not so favorites. But before we do that, before we
Uh-huh.
get into talking about the supergroup, the bands themselves,
Uh-huh.
I feel like it's important that we set a definition for our purposes,
Mm-hmm.
not an all-encompassing definition for everybody anytime ever in the whole world, but just you and me right here, right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've come up with a list. Do you want to hear the list?
These are what you do. This is a list of requirements or it's a definition or what is it? Like for
Yeah, for us to
conditions.
consider, yeah, conditions for us to consider these entities a
Mhm.
supergroup.
Okay, yeah, let hit me with them.
All right, and these are hard limits. I am not moving on these limits. You can be as flexible as you want, but I'm going to be a dick about it.
Well, we
All
have to
right?
draw a line somewhere,
That's right. We do have to draw a line
and we're
somewhere.
doing it here and now.
Otherwise, everybody and their mother, you and I get together, we're a supergroup, and that's not accurate.
That's not
So and this is, largely based on my own experience, it's got to
sure.
be three or more musicians who were already well known on their own
Hmm.
or with a famous band.
Okay,
And by well known, I mean you have to know their name. You don't have to look it up.
okay. So the all of the band, the three or more musicians, number one, and
Yeah.
each of them have to be a well, I use air quotes, well known, either because of their own note or Zoom.
You
Really,
got
what would
balloons when you did
from
air
air
quotes.
quotes? Either you have to know them either because they're a famous solo act, like a Steve Vai, for example,
Right.
or they worked with a band that was famous.
Right.
Okay. All right. Shoot. So I'm with you so far. That
Okay.
knocks out quite a few.
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Second hard limit is they got to record more than one album.
Oh.
One-offs don't count because that's just that we got together to jam and it was awesome, so
And we
let's record
recorded
it.
it. Right. Okay.
A lot of
Okay.
times, and I'm going to say even if they tour behind that album, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and this knocks out one of my favorites, which
Oh,
is the Starfleet project from Brian May that
yeah.
included Eddie Van Halen,
Yeah.
who you may have heard of, Phil Chen on bass,
Phil Chen, great bass player.
yeah, and Alan Gratzer, the drummer from REO Speedwagon,
Yeah. Oh, right.
who who is a fantastic drummer.
Who you'd never realize it from listening to
Yeah,
REO Speedwagon, but yet,
and Brian just got these guys that he knew together. He wanted to jam out with his friend Eddie, Edward, he calls him Edward, and they had a good time and they turned on the tape machine and then they mixed it and put it out as an album called the Starfleet Project.
and it was really good.
It was, as a matter of fact, I got the remastered version of it, remixed and remastered version of it, and it's even better.
Wow. But not a
R.I.P.
super
Eddie
group.
Van Halen. But not a super group because it was one thing, one little thing. It was an EP. They didn't
Mhm.
tour. Okay.
All
So
right.
that's
Sorry.
So even my limits knock out some of my favorites.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. I like that. Not self-serving.
Right. Number three, live only acts do not qualify.
Hmm. Do you have an example of a live only act?
Yeah, that big jam at the end of Eric Clapton's charity concerts. Not a super
Not
group.
a just a bunch of people on stage.
Just a just a bunch of dudes.
Doesn't count. I'm with
Doesn't
you.
count.
I'm with you.
Okay, number four. Side projects with other famous or semi-famous musicians are not prohibited, but they are discouraged. And I understand that this is going to knock out pretty much everything Mike Portnoy does.
Wait a second. Why would
Because he has 97 side projects that
he
record a few
does?
songs or make a couple of videos, and he loves to get his buddies together and jam.
Yeah.
And that is awesome, but they're not super groups.
There was a time period from when he left Dream Theater or was fired, depending on how you look at it, until this year when he went back, where there's a friend of mine who he would send me a text and say, "Hey, have you checked out this band?" And I'd say no, and he'd say, "Here, go check them out." And it would be Mike Portnoy on drums
Right.
every time. And it would be a different band every time. And it would be, I think it might have been 20 different projects. He just he, the man likes to play drums, and he definitely knows a bunch of people, and he likes to do his, like, he has a lot of, he wants to do a lot of different things. He did not settle for, like, I'm going to do another, like, this will be my only band, because he learned his lesson from Dream Theater, where they were
Right.
like, you can't do anything else, so you're back in the studio with us. And he was like, no, I want to do other things. And when he did other things, he did other things, man. He was
That's right.
everywhere. So, okay, but why do his side projects not count as supergroups? Especially because he's done them with people like Billy Sheehan and what's his
Because
name?
of the limit number five.
Steve Morse.
And
Okay.
this is my arbitrary line in the sand, and that is at least 2 studio recordings are required to qualify as a super group in my book.
At least
Because
two.
at least 2, that shows sustained interest, sustained effort, and more than just, hey, we got together to jam once and it sounded
or
good.
or a money grab.
Yeah, and that the first when I added money grab to that, the first thing I thought of was the Dirty Mac, which you've probably never heard of.
Nope.
Do you know the Dirty Mac?
Nope.
The Dirty Mac was John Lennon, who you've heard of,
Just
Eric
a little bit.
Clapton,
Who
who
I've heard
you've heard
of.
of, Keith Richards,
Who
who
I've
you've
heard
heard
of.
of,
Yeah.
and Mitch Mitchell, who, if you don't know, was Jimi Hendrix's
Yeah.
drummer,
Right.
right?
Supergroup.
So, I mean, bass player, sorry, not drummer,
Supergroup.
bass player. Anyways, yeah, you'd think it was a super group, but they played a couple of songs. They played a Beatles song. They played a song called "A Whole Lot of Yoko" on TV with in a TV special.
That this is that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
And
So
they
not a
okay.
super group.
And they named themselves after a dirty raincoat. All right. Um,
Really, really amazing collection of talent.
yeah.
When you've got guitar players so good, you put Keith Richards on bass, right? You definitely
Ouch.
have some super group potential, but no.
Was the
Um,
bass in open G tuning by any I'm just
it
kidding.
might have been.
Um,
So let's let's start by saying the first thing a lot of people are going to think of, and we need to get this out of the way.
okay.
Foo Fighters is not a super group.
Really? Well, I mean, I guess based on what you just said, I would I'd have to I mean, they're a super group, but they're not a super group
Right. They yeah,
because
they're a super group
right,
as in awesome band, but they're not a super group as
because the
in collection of people who were otherwise famous and got together for a sustained effort.
so Foo Fighters' first album, I want to say Dave Grohl played everything.
That would be accurate. He did.
And then when they toured, he had to get some musicians, which were friends of
Yeah.
his, and I heard of none of them.
Yeah, the only person that most of us would ever have heard of from Dave's band is Pat Smear, and not just because he played with
Nirvana.
Nirvana, he was famous on his own before that. Now,
Okay.
you had to know him from the punk scene,
You had to, right, right.
right? And now they have, since unfortunately Taylor Hawkins passed away, now their new drummer is a guy called Josh Freese, who
Who's
you also
been
may not know who he is, but he is session drummer extraordinaire. He's played
yeah,
with anybody and everybody. I've seen him play with Nine Inch Nails. I've seen him
perfect
play
circle.
with I haven't seen them. I've seen him play with Devo. He was Devo's drummer when I saw Devo play.
Oh, get out of here.
Absolutely. He was the youngest guy on stage by about 30 years, right? But other than that, you never heard of anybody that was in Foo Fighters before they were
Until
in Foo Fighters.
that's right.
All right. So,
They don't count.
um
Okay.
they don't count. So, do you want to kick things off now that you've got my parameters? Do you think you have a band that fits the parameters?
I think I do.
Okay, hit me.
Um, Audio Slave.
You
Audio
know,
Slave is Rage Against the Machine with Chris Cornell fronting. And when they formed, you knew all of them because of Rage Against the Machine and Soundgarden. And they did more than two recordings. They did it, I think, three, and toured on all of them. Go ahead. What do you? Now, I'm not saying that they're household names,
right.
but
And that's fine. But first of all, if we consider, I'm a little
I knew all
torn.
their names before Audio Slave.
Yes.
I knew, Brad and Tim
Yes.
and Zach
And
and Tom.
and me too. All right, I
Okay.
got it. No problem. And I love Rage Against the Machine and I love Soundgarden. But to me, that's Rage Against the Machine with a different singer. Right. So to me, not a super group, but
But
I would give that.
that's not one of your
I know.
conditions.
But it's arbitrary. I bought the
Oh,
albums. I like the albums,
I
but
know
I
you
would
do.
say by extension, you would have to also say that Prophets of Rage is a super group because that's
Mm,
Rage Against the Machine with a different singer.
yeah. Well,
Well, singers. They got a guy from Public Enemy and a guy from Cypress Hill.
okay, hold on. Now I'm backtracking because would side projects with other famous or semi-famous musicians discouraged? If you're a member of Audio Slave, do you consider Audio Slave a side project because Rage is your main project and Audio Slave is a
I don't.
side project? Is that
I think with these guys specifically with Audio Slave, they all considered it their real band. As far as the guys in Rage were knew, their band was done. Zach was not interested in getting back together.
Mhm.
Soundgarden had not recorded or played for a decade or more.
Right?
So as far as Chris Cornell was concerned, Soundgarden wasn't getting back together.
Nope.
So I'm willing to let you have that.
You're going to allow it.
And also because they recorded 2 albums,
Three.
they recorded 3 albums, right? But
Three bangers, by the way. They just got better and
yeah,
better. I'm sorry, man.
yeah, yeah, they were. But
All right,
to me,
Chris
it's
Cornell.
always going to be Rage Against the Machine with a singer instead of a rapper.
Oh, so since we're talking Chris Cornell, what is your thoughts on Temple of the Dog?
Chris Cornell solo project with people you've heard of as guest musicians.
Not a super group.
One recording, a
That's
couple of
right.
one-off
That's
live
right.
performances.
That's right. That's right. One recording. Okay. All right. Just
And
curious.
and at the time it came out, you hadn't heard of most of those people yet.
Yeah. It's funny. I got on the Temple of the Dog bandwagon late, so by the time I got the album, I knew who they were,
You knew, yeah, you knew who they all
but
were.
you're right. When it actually came out, they were nobodies.
Yeah.
in the Seattle scene. Okay, interesting.
Okay, so that's one. I'll give you that one. I'll let you have that one. I would call it marginal at best, but this is subjective.
My next one is gonna you're gonna there's no way you won't agree with it
Okay, what's your next one?
because it may be one of your favorite bands of all time. John Sykes, Tony Franklin, and
Yes.
Carmine, Blue Murder Baby.
Oh, absolutely. Two albums, two tours, although Carmine did not participate in the second tour, and I'm not sure Tony Franklin did either. And the
What?
second tour wasn't very long. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Oh, and awesome. That first album was so, so good. It was like Whitesnake
Inspired.
1987 Part 2,
Yep.
right? And
Inspired.
oh, and yeah. And now most people had not heard of Tony Franklin, but if they watched a video, they knew who he was. He had been in The Firm. He was the bass player in The Firm
Yep.
with Paul Rogers and Jimmy Page.
Yep.
And he was a massively in demand studio bassist,
Okay.
largely because of his fretless skills. And of course, Carmine is way older than you think he is. Carmine was born in the 40s. He's a boomer. He was
The 40s.
in the 40s. He was in Vanilla Fudge. He was in Cactus. He was in Beck Bogart in a piece,
Mm-hmm.
right? He played with Rod Stewart for decades. And of course, he was in Blue Murder. He was super famous in the drum
Everywhere.
circles.
He was
I mean,
everywhere.
he played with Jeff Beck. As far as I'm concerned, that's the only thing he ever needed to do for you to
Yeah.
remember his name.
Yeah. Um, that may
Yeah,
be
no,
one of the
zero
greatest
argument.
pedigrees. I mean, now on paper, I never would have put those three together.
Right. Yeah, no.
And at the
Like how,
time, they were not like these are not household names, other than the fact that John Sykes was fortunate enough to record one of the greatest Whitesnake songs, like one of the most popular hits, and then they
yeah,
proceeded to remove it from the record and put a new version on there that was just garbage.
which was yeah, just absolutely garbage. And you also it's important to know that John and Tony are both British. So they knew each other. They weren't friends, but they knew each other from the British music scene, which is much smaller than the American music scene. I think Carmine's from New York or something like that. But John and Tony knew who each other were. And Tony was just coming off his stint in The Firm. So that had raised his
Pedigree a
uh
little.
yeah, exactly.
Um, I when I remember when Blue Murder was announced, and I knew that was coming out because that was when I was much younger and reading like Circus and Guitar World and like all these music magazines. And I didn't even know that John Sykes could sing
I
lead.
know, right?
And I'm telling you, he when I heard Blue Murder for the first time, I was like, Coverdale who? John Sykes has a killer
Yeah.
voice, and I've heard them live. They did live recording, I think maybe between the first and second
He's
record.
he sounded just like that.
Right, and this is before auto tune and all that bullshit. He was he was great. And if you think about the guitar he was playing, the lines he was playing and singing, John was a real talent. It's a real shame that
Yeah.
after Blue Murder didn't really pan out, that you just stopped hearing about him,
Yeah,
you
it
know?
really is because he was and as far as I'm concerned, he was the talent in White Snake.
Yeah.
You know, they had another pretty good album that came out after that, the one that had Steve Vai on it. Adrian Vandenberg wrote most of those songs,
Hmm.
but the best song on the album was an old Whitesnake song,
Hmm. Yeah.
you know, and the reason it was awesome is very simple, two words, Steve Vai,
Yeah.
you know, and Steve Vai is what kept Whitesnake from becoming irrelevant
Hmm.
with that next album.
That's right. They needed a name and they got one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really wish all that fame and adulation had gone to John Sykes and Blue Murder because they deserved it.
Seriously. All right, so those are my first two out of the gate, and I have at
Okay.
least one more, but this was your topic, and I have a feeling you have some pretty strong opinions about supergroups, my friend.
I
I'm
do.
just
You want me to
saying.
throw a couple down?
Yeah, I mean, give me your thoughts on supergroups.
Okay. I would say that there's some super groups that people don't know are super groups,
Okay.
like Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and then Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, right? So you've got the Byrds, Buffalo Springfield, the Hollies, and Neil Young, who had played in several bands. Now, if you weren't up on 60s folk music, you wouldn't
Right.
know those guys,
No.
but that was a big deal. Crosby, Stills, and Nash getting together was a big deal, and then adding Neil Young was an even bigger deal. And
Yeah.
they made some amazing music.
Mm-hmm.
And they they actually they were so good they completely overshadowed their other bands, and that's why you never really heard of them.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're big into 12-string electric guitar, you never heard of
Right.
the Byrds,
The birds, right.
right? You know some of their songs, but um, and I think you and I being so embedded in the hard rock slash heavy metal, we might not look outside our genre. So let me throw a couple at you, right? We've got the Million Dollar Quartet, which is arguably the first supergroup.
Okay.
Okay. Maybe not the first, but to me, based on my criteria, they're the first true supergroup. And that's get a load of this lineup, Andy. Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Carl Perkins, and Johnny Cash.
I didn't even know this was a thing.
Yeah.
When did this happen?
Um, in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s.
And by your definition, they had to have recorded more than one record. So they did more than
Okay.
one record?
Now, technically, let's hold on here. Uh, their their first album, they only released one album, all four of them together, but that album had 47 tracks on it.
47?
Yes. So that's more than one album's worth of material. And then in the 80s, they reunited, obviously without Elvis, for two albums. So I
Oh,
think technically they qualify, but maybe not in the spirit of things. Um, and since I mentioned Johnny Cash, let's go to his other super group. And these guys actually fully qualify. They're called the Highwaymen: Johnny Cash,
yeah.
Willie Nelson,
Yep.
Chris Christopherson, and Waylon Jennings.
That one I knew about because I was a kid, and
Yeah.
that one I knew about.
The bad boys of outlaw country. They put out 3 albums. They had huge tours. And in my opinion, their output was better than any of their solo output.
Oh
And
man.
I like Johnny Cash a lot. And
Yeah.
I'm a pretty notable fan of Waylon Jennings, although I wouldn't put him up in my top 10,
Okay.
right? So those are two super groups that people probably never heard of
Yeah.
or didn't know about. I would say Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you didn't know that was a super group because
Because
ELP.
ELP was so popular.
Yeah, and the bands that those guys were in before were called The Nice and King Crimson, but it was before King Crimson was something.
Right.
So, I don't think that really counted, you
Yeah.
know, as a super group. They were just a super group,
Yeah. ELP sort of
right?
overshadowed their previous work.
Yeah. So, we mentioned
Unlike
you
the
mentioned
Traveling Wilburys.
okay, well, I was going to say the Traveling Wilburys, who we focused on in a early Music That Matters segment.
Yep.
George Harrison, Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne, Tom Petty, Roy Orbison. Right now, they never they never did a big tour
Right.
because they all had their own careers,
Mm-hmm.
all
And
solo careers,
right.
except for
And
Jeff Lynne was in ELO and Tom Petty had the Heartbreakers.
yep.
And then Roy Orbison died before they could start recording the second album.
Mm-hmm.
He'd been in on the discussions, but then unfortunately he passed away.
Hmm.
But that first album that I mean, both of their albums are good, but that first album they did is amazing.
Hmm.
It's so chock full of tasty, tasty guitar
And
and
just great
just
songwriting.
great songs, great hooks, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. So they're probably at the top of my list for supergroups.
Okay.
Um, I mentioned the Firm. I really liked the Firm because it was so unlike Led Zeppelin.
It really was.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I was really disappointed by that. And
Yeah,
then,
a lot of people didn't know what to make of it.
yeah, it was very, very different for all of them.
Yeah, and their second album, I'm going to say this right now, their second album was not good. It
Yeah.
was adequate, but it was not anything like the first album.
Hmm.
And the first album had a cover on it,
Okay.
right? And I did not like that song. I
So,
didn't
right.
like it from the original band,
The original.
right? It's the You've Lost That Love and Feeling.
Oh,
I don't like it. I don't like it. Right?
they only had one hit that I recall, Radioactive.
Radioactive, great song too.
Hmm.
Right? And the first time you ever saw anybody with the balls to get up on stage and play guitar with Jimmy Page
Yeah.
is Paul Rogers, not a terrible guitar player,
No.
fully adequate,
Hmm.
right? And of course he was playing acoustic guitar, so that's kind of how he checked that, right? So I'm not going to use them as one of mine,
Okay.
because good, and they fit all the requirements. They did a big tour. I think they did 2 tours, but that second album is just not good. you know,
Yeah, but it is an album.
it is absolutely an album. I would say,
Why do you think that
un,
happens? Can we just take a second? Because they are not the only band on this list that did a first album that was really good, if not stellar. And then then the second one is just filler or garb. Like, why do you
yeah,
think that? What do you think happens?
I think they were all busy with other things.
But they were
Jimmy
contractually
Page,
obligated to do something.
yeah, they had to produce another album. Jimmy Page was already looking forward to his collaboration with David Coverdale. Um, there was a lot of other things going on. Obviously, Tony Franklin and Chris Slade were riding that money pony as far as they could.
Chris
Um,
Slade, that's right. He was the drummer who went on
he
to
was
play
the
with
drummer,
AC/DC.
right, right. Twice, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Um, so, and unfortunately, um, because of the criteria that I put down, it actually disqualifies a lot of my favorite, what would most people would
Hmm.
consider super groups, right?
Because they do one record and that's it.
Yeah, they do one record, and even if they did more than one record, you never heard of their other bands,
Hmm.
right? Like Cream, sure, everybody's heard of Eric Clapton, but nobody heard of those other guys,
Right. Jack Bruce, Ginger Baker.
right? Humble Pie, you never heard of anybody but Peter Frampton, and you may not have heard of Peter Frampton, at that
Mm.
point.
Hmm.
Um, Blind Faith, they only did one album. Same
Blind
with the Honey
Faith.
Drippers.
Honey
They only did
Drippers,
one
Robert
album. Yeah.
Plant,
Yeah. Do you
one album.
remember HSAS?
No.
Hagar, Schoen, Aronson, Shreve,
Now
Sammy
I
Hagar,
do.
and Neil Schoen, right?
Now I
One
do.
album, and only 2 guys were famous, so it doesn't qualify.
What about GTR? Are they on there?
GTR's on the list, and but they don't qualify because they only recorded one album.
Right.
One album, they did one awesome tour, which I saw, but you got Steve Hackett from Genesis, Steve Howe from Yes,
Yes.
uh, Jonathan Mover, who was a studio drummer to the Stars,
Hmm.
a dude called Max Spalding, I think, or Max Bacon. I forget the other 2 guys' names. And that's where it starts to waver, right? The bass player and the bass player and the singer were nobodies.
Hmm.
And I would argue that Jonathan Mover, as much as I like him, was a nobody.
Right,
Um,
right, right.
he lucked into that gig and he killed it, but the artistic differences between Hackett and Howe, the Steves, derailed that project.
Yeah.
Um, them Crooked Vultures, which had Dave Grohl, Josh Homme, and John Paul Jones. They've
Hmm.
only done one album so far. So if they want to put out a second album, then I'll consider them a super group.
What about
Um,
Rainbow?
Rainbow, not
Would
a
you
super
can
group. No,
Why? They did
they
many
because they
albums.
yeah, but all they did was change guitar players and change singers.
Wait, hold on. Let me think about this. Rainbow was Blackmore and Dio. Carmine. Was it Carmine the drummer in Rainbow? No, he wasn't, was he? Was he?
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I'm going to look it up. Keep talking.
I feel like Rainbow feels to me like it was Richie's. Well, I don't know. Now I don't know because I don't know that Rainbow. Well, wait, was it
There were
John?
so many
Was the
people in Rainbow that Wikipedia has a separate page for previous band members
All right,
in
well, let's go
Rainbow.
with the first lineup out of the gate. Who was the first
Okay.
lineup? Richie and
Ho-
Ronnie James.
Hold on. I'm going back down. I'm going down to the bottom of the list. Uh Here we go.
I know it did change
Got
a lot.
Ronnie James Dio,
Who at the
Craig
time,
Gruber.
who at the time was Ronnie famous before Dio? I mean, before
He was
Rainbow?
he was not.
Mm. Okay, go
I
ahead.
would say being in Rainbow elevated gave him his cred,
Okay.
right?
Mm,
Um,
mm.
Never heard of them, never heard of them. Cozy Powell
Yeah,
played
Cozy
drums,
Powell
and you gotta already know who he was though. And then let's see, nobody. Bob Daisley played bass for a little while, and so if you know Ozzy's solo band,
but that was
then you know
after
who Bob
that
Daisley is. But that was after, right? Roger Glover was the bass player,
from Deep
also a really
Purple.
good singer, right? Graham Bonnet and Joe Lynn Turner on vocals,
Uh,
right? But yeah, see that. So I don't consider Rainbow a super group.
all right. I concede.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, who else do I consider a super group? Let's instead of talking about who I don't, let's talk about who I do.
We need to talk about one that I do and I really don't like and you love.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. You, sir, are talking about Damn Yankees.
Oh man, I think it's you and I probably disagree more on this than we do on Telecasters.
Yeah, and I get it, right? Ted Nugent is an asshole. He's sexist, he's racist, he's anti-LGBT, he's like he is in for all intents and purposes, he is a socially unacceptable person if you're not already socially accepting him. But he is a fantastic guitar player.
Fantastic. Is that really what he is? Because I've always considered him average.
I would agree right up until he's in Damn Yankees, at which point the other guys in the band raise his skills.
You know, so here's what happened with Damn Yankees. I used to like Night Ranger. And
Love
then,
Night Ranger.
yeah, and then Night Ranger started to succumb to their own middling success. Like they got
Right.
really big with Sister Christian. I mean, they were popular before Sister Christian, which to me is an average song at best. But it's their
But then
power
they
ballad.
exploded. Yeah, then they
Right. So
exploded.
they had songs like Don't Tell Me You Love Me and all these really cool songs. And they
4
were
in the morning.
and they were one of these first they were one of the first dual guitar bands from like the early 80s where they were like really like like very good players.
Hmm.
Jeff Watson with the 8 finger technique. I mean, they were, and Brad Gillis, let's face it, Brad Gillis probably got the craziest, most difficult job on the planet after Night Ranger, which
Nailed it.
was replacing Randy Rhoads for a tour.
Mm.
And yeah, nailed it. Um,
And then went back to Night Ranger.
right. So Night Ranger, Night Ranger, and Styx both were, the same thing was happening to them. The 80s happened and they tried to fit into this mold. Styx in
Hmm.
particular with Mr. Roboto and that terrible album. And then Tommy was like, I gotta go. Like Tommy Shaw was like, I gotta go. Like my solo stuff is better than this. And he was right, by the way.
Yeah.
And Night Ranger started to suffer because of their fame. And Jack Blades is like, I can go do other stuff. And so they I don't know where Dan Yankees came from or how it happened. They had one hit that I remember, and that hit turned me off to anything else they could do. I really didn't like the song. It was very disappointing. I thought it was a
All
little
good.
lame, and I didn't give the album a listen. And then at a point in time when I was ready to give that album a listen, Ted Nugent had emerged as the
Ted
horrible
Nugent.
person that he is. And so
Yeah.
now I won't. So now they just have to go down in history for me as my least favorite supergroup. But you clearly have a different experience, and I will allow that that is possible.
Yeah, it was at the time that their first album came out, it was exactly the music that I was drawn to.
Okay.
Hard rock, guitar solos, big vocal harmonies,
Tell me
you
that
know.
tell me the hit was not the best song on the record.
I
There,
it depends on,
that was high enough, I believe it was called, right? Or
yeah, high enough. I don't think the ballads were the best songs on the album,
okay. That's what I was asking.
right? Because like especially the first album had Coming of Age and Bad Reputation, first two songs,
Mhm.
fantastic songs. Um, and then Runaway, High Enough, and Damn Yankee. Side one, really, really good.
Okay.
Side two, not so good. And
Mhm.
they let the Nuge sing on one song, which was just dripping with sexual innuendo. It's a song called Pile Driver. It was like take the vocals out, and it's a really cool hard rock song.
Okay.
Um, the second album had another hit ballad on it, Where You Going Now, not the best song on the album. The first two songs, Don't Tread on Me and 15 Minutes of Fame, fantastic songs. The ballad on the second album called Silence is Broken, better than the song they released as a single.
Wait, who drummed on those records?
Uh, a guy called Michael Cartellone or Cartelloni, depending on how ethnic you pronounce his name.
Okay.
Right?
So by your definition, I don't know that guy.
No, but you know Tommy Shaw, Ted Nugent, and Jack Blades. That's three.
Yeah, but you don't know the other dude.
That's okay.
It's not okay. No, by your standard, I am taking
The
them
re-
out of the I am
the
taking them.
requirement was three or more.
Oh, it wasn't.
Yes, it was.
You
Go back and
said
look.
a son of a bitch.
A collection of three or more musicians who are already well known due to their own
Meaning
fame or work with a famous band.
the band has to be 3 or more musicians. It doesn't say that if there's a 5 piece band, you have to know 3 of them.
Well,
Because we've already this
that was my intent.
so your intent was if it's a um, 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 uh, uh, if there's a 7 piece band, as long as we know 3 of them, that counts. That's what
Yeah,
you're
but
saying.
how many seven-piece supergroups are there?
I'm just asking a hypothetical.
I I would probably have to argue it some more, but the reason I set the three or more was
Uh-huh.
because of Damn Yankees, Asia, The Firm, right? And some of these other super groups that really had, it was like three guys you heard of and a drummer.
But that counts.
To me, that counts. Right. So here's one that I don't think, and I would agree that Damn
Hmm.
Yankees is probably marginal. And I support your right to push them out of the pool for the purposes of this discussion. But let's talk about another like full on hard rock super group.
Hmm.
Chickenfoot, Sammy Hagar, Joe Satriani, Michael Anthony, and
Chad
Chad
Smith.
Smith. Right now, you heard all four of those guys, so it's not just three dudes that you heard of plus a drummer.
Unless you've been living under a rock, yes.
Right, right. They did two albums, they did two tours.
Was it only two? That's a
It was only
shame.
two. Yeah, it is a shame.
That first record was really good.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
was
it was.
expecting to dislike it.
Me too.
I was expecting to dislike it. It shouldn't have worked. Joe, I mean, I hadn't been able to listen to a lot of Joe's solo stuff for a long time. It just got, there was something
Wheatley.
about, and like, I also, maybe as a guitar player and a listener to music, I don't even know English anymore. Like, I want more substance. And
Yeah,
I felt like Joe, like I felt his great work was behind him, and now it was just all starting to get like noodling and meandering. And I didn't know he had this side of him. And it was really nice to see him in a band setting where he
yeah,
had to like lay back, play in the pocket, not be Joe. And like it reminded me of his band days. He was in the Greg Kinn band, Greg
yeah.
Kinn band.
Great band.
Yeah. Um, but anyway, yeah, I thought that at least the first record was stellar. The second record was good too. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
really good
So,
rock music, just straight ahead, great rock music.
yeah. Unfortunately, name one song off either album.
I can.
I know. And I still listen to both of them, and I have to look at look at the iTunes and see what the names of the songs are. And that's fine. That's nothing wrong with that. I would say they nailed my definition of supergroup though.
I mean, yeah, four
Yeah.
piece,
So
all of them.
so let's talk about another one that may or may not fit in,
Hmm.
which I think was really, really good. The Power Station.
Ooh, I knew at least several of them. Several members of Duran Duran,
Two,
right? Two,
Andy Taylor guitar, John Taylor
John Taylor, the
bass,
bass, um, the vocalist,
Robert Palmer.
Robert Palmer, and who
Yeah.
else? Wait, don't, let me
The
guess.
drummer.
Hold on. Was it Terry Bozzio?
No.
Oh,
This depending on your background and how deep you were into disco music, this is three guys and a drummer. Three guys you heard of in a drummer. The drummer's called
oh,
Tony Thompson. He played drums in Chic.
oh, right.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic drummer. But if you
Yeah.
weren't into disco, you never heard of him.
Yeah, but you know what? Tony Thompson is that dude's legit.
Yeah, he is. And they did two albums. Now they were years and years apart because Robert Palmer, after the first Power Station album sold a lot of copies and was really popular.
Hmm.
And Robert Palmer decided he was too famous to play with these guys. So their tour got canceled, and it was years before they recorded their second album.
Why do people do these things?
Yeah. But the second album was also really good. The first album totally, totally slapped.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, great album. It was like mixing rock, pop, and disco all together, and it didn't sound like any of those things.
No. And if you listen to any of those bands that these people came from, power stations sounded nothing like any of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fantastic music, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there you go. And so I've been talking a lot here because I
Okay.
do that. I tend to roll over you in these discussions because I get so excited.
That's okay.
Why don't you tell me about another super group that you loved or so-called super group that you hated?
Um, well, I don't want to give this away
Okay, don't give
because,
it away.
okay, I won't give it
Pick a
away. I'm
different
waiting.
pick it a different one.
I've decided to wait um on one last super group because of how they it goes to music that matters. So I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Okay.
So did you say you did think you would think okay, based on your criteria,
Based
Asia would be a super group.
I would consider Asia a super group, but only but you would have had to be a little embedded in the British music scene again to know
Hmm.
who all of the dudes were, right?
See,
Because
and
you got
that's
the easy ones are Steve Howe and Carl Palmer,
because Carl Palmer at this point had been in Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
right? And
Right,
played with a whole bunch of other people,
right. And Steve
right?
Howe had been in GTR. No, I'm just kidding. Yes.
So then the other two guys are John Wetton and Jeff Downs, who,
Jeff
if
Downs was also in Yes.
he has been in and out of Yes several times.
Hmm.
Um, and John, I forget the name. I forget John Wetton's band. So let me look him up real quick.
But right now we have three. We're three people, so three or more.
Yeah. John Wetton was another guy that was in King Crimson.
That's right. That's
He
right. I
also
forgot that.
played, he also played in Roxy Music and Uriah Heep and a band called Wishbone Ash. Very short stints in all of those bands,
Wow.
but that helped him have enough visibility in the British music scene to attract. He's the guy that he started Asia. He's the one that started drawing people to Asia and was the primary songwriter, right? And their debut album sold 10 million copies, right? And the
Yep.
other co-founder of Asia was Jeff Downs.
Yeah.
So, they both had more success with Asia. And Jeff Downs, you would have to know who Trevor Horn was.
Hmm.
Jeff Downs and Trevor Horn were in the Buggles.
Right.
Video Killed the Radio Star, right?
Yep. Huge.
Yeah, huge song. And Trevor Horn also played with Yes on and off, but Downs was the keyboard player kind of after all of that played out,
Yeah.
right? He was the keyboard player in Asia. So I
Ooh.
definitely consider Asia a super group.
Two or three records, was it? Two?
Uh, I think Asia had, I think they had three back then, and then they did another one
Okay.
when
I mean,
when they kind of had a, oh, wait a minute. We got Asia in 82, Alpha in 83, Astra in 85. So those were the three albums right in a row.
right.
Then they did four albums in the 90s.
Wow.
They
What?
did, yeah, they did one, two, three, four albums in three albums in the first decade of the 2000s, and then three albums in the 2010s. And they haven't done anything recorded since that. But
Okay.
for me, I only listened to Asia when Steve Howe was in the band because to me, Asia reminded me of his playing in GTR, which I thought was really great when he was playing the more straight ahead rock stuff.
Yeah. And I really liked Asia with him in it. And then
Yeah.
as you were talking, I thought of a super group that I think they're a super group. Okay. I think they are. You did
Ooh,
not put them on your list. And I'm wondering
okay.
if that was on purpose. KXM.
Absolutely a super group.
Yee!
I know all three guys. They've
George
recorded two
Lynch,
albums.
George
George
Lynch,
Lynch
Doug Pinnick, and
from
Ray.
King's X.
Yep, and Ray Luzier from Korn.
Yeah.
Admittedly, I did not know who Ray was until Korn, till he joined them. But I gotta think he was out there before that.
Yeah, I think he was too. Hold on, my computer's dinging. Let me turn on the do not disturb. Yeah, I definitely consider now. Let me step back for just a second.
Several albums. I don't
When
know how much
but
I don't know how much I
but
loved all of them, but definitely the first one out of the gate was crazy good.
crushingly good.
Yeah.
When you look at the guys in King's X, Doug Pinnick on bass and vocals,
Hmm.
Ty Tabor on guitar and vocals, Jerry Gaskill on drums and vocals,
Hmm.
they are probably the biggest side project guys outside of Mike Portnoy in rock today.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They
I
have so many side projects.
I didn't know that.
Oh,
Ty
yeah.
Ty has Platypus, but
Ty
with
also has the Jelly Jam with Dream Theater's bass player, John Myung,
wait, hold on a second.
and they've got like 4 or 5 albums.
I think Platypus and Jelly Jam are super groups.
I would consider Jelly Jam absolutely a super group. Ty Tabor, right? John Myung from Dream Theater, and Rod Morgenstein from
Yeah.
the Dixie Dregs and Winger.
And if you put Derek Sherinian in that, then you have Platypus.
Yeah, and they recorded as the Jelly Jam. They recorded 4 albums,
Yep.
2 of which I think were amazing,
Yep.
and 2 of which I think were good.
Yep. Ooh, Ty Tabor also did a record with the Bissonette brothers,
Yes, he did.
and that's a super group.
Yeah, so he's got Platypus, the Jelly Jam, Jughead,
That's the one with the
Zenuphobe,
Bissonette brothers.
yeah, Zenuphobe, which is more of a um electronic thing that he did with one of the guys from uh Galactic Cowboys. I don't consider Zenuphobe is absolutely a side project and not a super group. But yeah, but see, Jughead doesn't fit because they only recorded 1 album.
Okay.
Right? So let's look at Doug's discography. He's got Pound Hound, which is kind of a solo band.
Yeah.
He's got KXM. He's in another super group called Pinnick, Gales, and Pridgeon, which is a really
That's
lame name.
that's
But
right. But I don't who's Pridgeon? I don't know that I know that person.
Tommy Pridgeon, I forget. I looked him up
Okay.
once, and let's see, Pridgeon. Tom Pridgeon, Thomas, excuse me. He was in the Mars Volta, and he was in a punk band called Trash Talk. So he's not really somebody. He's not as famous as Doug Pinnick and Eric Gales,
Yeah.
but man, the Pinnick Gales Prison albums are fantastic, and they're very much like, the way I look at them is, it's basically Eric Gales with a really good songwriter and a
Hmm.
very powerful singer and an amazing rhythm section.
Eric Gales incidentally just got himself a signature pickup set from the Fender Custom Shop.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Yeah.
Um,
So, and here's a little known fact about Thomas Pridgeon. Won the Guitar Center drum off at age 9, and a year later became the youngest ever Zildjian endorsee.
okay.
There you go.
Wow.
So yeah, he's been around.
The only other the only other band I could think of I mentioned a little bit earlier as far as supergroups go was when you mentioned Josh Freese, I realized a perfect circle. So Josh
Yeah,
Freese on drums, Maynard um
Tool. You may have
from
heard of him,
Tool. Yeah. Now, at the time, I didn't know Billy Howardell, except he was Adam Jones' guitar tech in Tool, not famous.
right?
And the first bass player, I don't know how famous she was, Pause La Chantaine, but that's the only reason why I didn't necessarily name them. Um, once they got once they got the guitar player from Smashing Pumpkins for the second album, James Iha, then I thought that's potential supergroup potential. Like
Yeah,
first
Paz
album,
played
you
with.
only I heard of Maynard, and I think that might have been about it.
Yeah, yeah, and Paz was in the Pixies after Kim Deal quit.
Oh, right.
So I would consider her at that point. She would be super group eligible, but eh, I don't know. I don't consider a Perfect Circle a super group. I consider them a Maynard side project,
See, I think you
even with
might be right.
Eha in the band.
Yeah, I think you might be right. Okay. Well, their first album was really great. I mean, moody and dynamic, and I just
Oh yeah,
loved
it's
it. I loved
fantastic.
it.
And
Yeah.
their covers album is one of the few covers albums I listen to,
Oh, really?
because they did it's like the Rage Against the Machine covers album, and they just reinterpreted everything and uh, just elevated. They showed how malleable a great song can be and how far away from its original interpretation you can take it and it still be a great song.
Hmm. Was okay. Oh, you're gonna hate me for this. You're gonna
Go
hate me for
ahead.
this.
I'm not.
Okay. Okay. If I told you a band was forming in the mid 80s,
Okay.
okay, and I told you that band would consist of Greg Bissonette,
I heard of him.
Billy Sheehan,
I heard of him.
Steve Vai,
I heard of him.
and David Lee Roth.
I heard of him.
Is that a supergroup?
Uh so they recorded 2 albums with that lineup. They did 2 major tours on which I saw them play both times. And it's hard to say because
It's fun.
at the time,
Uh-huh.
the only really famous guy in that band was David Lee Roth, and they were David Lee
Super,
Roth's band.
super famous. It's a side project. However,
Well, it wasn't a side project. It was David Lee Roth's solo
yeah, you're
career.
right, because they broke up. There was no getting back together. But
Yeah, Steve Vai came from Frank Zappa's band, where he was a
and
side man.
Alcatraz, and I knew his name when he joined. So he was, to me, he was famous.
Yeah. Oh, I knew all of those guys.
Yeah. So to me, I think supergroup, but it's really not. But yet it kind of sort of is, right?
Yeah.
Will you allow it?
All right. So technically,
Oh,
technically, all right. Let me look at Greg Bissonette's Wikipedia page. Um, he has played on albums by dozens of recording artists.
yeah.
So he was a studio guy.
Yeah. But I
He
mean,
played he
three of
played
those.
with he played with he played in a band with Steve Lukather for a little while.
Yep. Yep. He sure did.
Uh I think that's I think that's 3 guys and a drummer. So, I think if one of the guys wasn't David Lee Roth, that would have easily been considered a super group. But
Telling
David
you.
Lee Roth was such a towering figure. I mean, a lot of people don't remember this or don't realize this, But when David Lee Roth left Van Halen, that
Mhm.
cracked the heavy metal world in two.
Yeah.
And he absolutely had to kill when he came out with a new band. He
Yeah.
had to have somebody, he had to have two guys like Eddie Van Halen to be awesome. He had to have Billy Sheehan and Steve Vai,
Yeah. I
right?
mean,
He
he
had to
nailed
have
it.
the
That
bass
record's
player.
stupid good.
Oh, both of those David Lee Roth albums are amazing.
Stupid good.
Sorry, my they're so good. My voice cracked. Um, but do I consider that a supergroup?
Let's go back. You don't have to think about it. Let's go back to
I'm
your
not gonna
criteria.
I'm not gonna be able to not think about it.
But I want to
Go
go
back
to
to
your
okay. Go to the criteria. Let's go
okay.
back up to the criteria.
So your criteria
Uh, well, let's start
definition: a
three
collection
or
of
more
three or more
musicians who
musicians.
were already well known. So we've
Okay.
got that,
Okay.
right? Three guys plus a drummer.
One-off recordings don't qualify.
They recorded three albums, or this lineup recorded two albums.
Right. Live
They're
only
not
acts don't qualify. And side projects with other famous or semi-famous musicians discouraged. So
so. Do we consider those solo albums a David Lee Roth quote side project?
no, because it wasn't like he was just doing it to go back to Van Halen later. He
Yeah,
was out.
and it wasn't. They were not just. They were not all David Lee Roth songs,
That's correct.
right? They
Tobacco
they
Road
were
was a cover.
Steve Vai, Billy Sheehan
They
both
did
wrote songs with the
they did a
band. They had
cover
some
of a Billy
outside,
Sheehan song called Shy Boy.
yeah, yeah. So I by the criteria, that's a super group.
And a hell of a super group, man. They were amazing.
Yeah.
That was an amazing band.
If I had thought of that before, that would have made my list, my short list, because that is not just a super group; it is a super group. I don't think from a technical standpoint in, you know, 1980, whatever it was when that
Uh-huh.
album came out, 1985 or 6 or 7,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there was a better I don't think there was a better album for a couple of
Mm-mm.
years on either side.
Nope.
And then they put out Skyscraper, which was not as popular, but I think was a better album because they had
Really?
more time to gel together as a songwriting team.
Okay.
Oh yeah, man. Dude, I mean, but Yankee Rose and Going Crazy, definitely the top singles from that band. I mean, just kind of no doubts about that.
But every song on that first record, Elephant Gun,
All good
and
songs.
I mean, and like Steve Vai, just can we take a second to like, I know he's been out there for like 40 years now and people take it for granted, but
He
before,
really has.
but right, but before that record, and you didn't know who Steve Vai was, this is before, before, oh my God,
White
can't think
Snake.
of it. No, yes, but what's his solo record that he did after the David Lee
Passion
Roth
and
stuff,
Warfare.
Passion and Warfare. This is before that,
Yeah, so the only solo work he'd put out was that thing called Flexible,
Flexible.
which is weird Frank Zappa shit.
It's wild. It's
Yeah, it's
wild.
great, but it's
Yeah,
weird.
it's wild stuff. Um, I mean, his playing was so otherworldly. It's just it's hard to understate or overstate just how influential that album was from a guitar perspective. He did things on that record. There, I forget what song it was where the solo he took the mic stand and just ran the mic stand up and down the strings like a giant slide. Right? He he just did goofy things with his guitar that other people just would not do, man. He was crazy. He was
Yeah,
Jack Butler. Come on, man.
he was.
He picked up the guitar by the whammy bar and shook it up and down. I mean, he made the guitar do crazy things. All right, so I mean, David, that to me, of all the bands we've talked about has got to be the pinnacle of rock
I gotta give it
supergroup,
to you.
man.
And frankly, if I had thought about that before, that would be my top supergroup because
Woo!
just just the amazing level of musicianship and song craftsmanship.
Yeah.
And I think they got better with their second album, even though again that album was not as commercially successful.
Yeah. I was going to ask about Mr. Big, but I don't think Mr. Big counts because I know you know Billy Sheehan and I know we know Paul Gilbert, but did we know the other two dudes like Pat Torpy? Yeah, I think you
Um,
could arguably say you've seen his name on albums, but I mean, I don't know, man. And I know I
well,
never heard of the singer,
you you never heard of Eric Martin?
not before Mr. Big, no.
Oh,
Why? What did he
okay.
do?
Well, I think so he was
Am I showing my ignorance?
no, not at all, because it's one of those things. It's like the early British supergroups. You kind of had to know the scene, right? So
Hmm.
he was in a group called the Eric Martin Band, right? Um, but mostly he did kind of studio work and movie soundtrack contributions, right? He had a song in the movie Teachers. He had a song in the movie Iron Eagle. Um,
Okay.
he worked with people who played with other people that were pretty famous. He was
Okay.
on the verge of becoming somebody.
Okay.
And when they when Mr. Big put out Lean Into It, that was the thing that made him somebody.
Hmm.
But and Pat Torpy had played with a bunch of different groups. He's unfortunately passed away. Um,
What?
oh, you didn't know? Yeah, he died in 2018.
Oh, no, I didn't know that. Oh, rest
Yeah,
in peace,
yeah.
Mr. Torpy. I didn't know that.
He had he had Parkinson's and he had some other health problems.
Okay.
Um, but he played with your favorite guy, Ted Nugent. Um, he played with a guitar player called Chris Impellitteri, who is
Yeah.
another
And a
big
speed
shredder. He
demon.
played
Yeah.
he played with John Parr. He played with Belinda Carlisle, Robert Plant. He
Yeah, he
played
was
in
just,
Montrose for a while. Played with
yeah.
Richie Kotzen, and he was even in the Knack.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, my Sharona band, the Knack.
But he
Uh,
wasn't on that recording.
no, he wasn't on that album,
He
but
played with them
um,
later.
yeah. So you kind of it's Eric Martin and Pat Torpy. You kind of had to be in LA and know who they were to really consider that a super group. But
Yeah.
the big news with Mr. Big was Billy Sheehan moving from playing with Steve Vai to moving to playing with Paul Gilbert, who was not known as a band guy. He was
He
just
was
this
in
shredder.
Racer X. I knew him from
Yeah,
Racer
which
X.
yeah, and that was just a shred project. I mean, it was
It,
amazing, don't get me wrong.
but but if I was listening to Racer X back then, I was not hearing the Paul Gilbert that we know today, who is
No.
profoundly talented.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, the his depth of skill is literally unbelievable.
To call
And
him a shredder these days would be an insult. He's an
yeah,
incredible singer. He's a great songwriter, and his playing is just top notch. And he's reinvented himself.
yeah. And but I think for the first 10 or 12 or 15 years, he really was kind of just a shredder.
Yeah,
And it was his time with Mr. Big that started to turn that around, where he started to play to the song instead of just play.
yeah.
He took that massive bank of skill and honed it into a craft.
You know who else did that? Marty Friedman.
Oh,
Dude,
absolutely.
Marty Friedman. I'm sorry, this is so not supergroup topic. Although, is Megadeth a supergroup? I would say no. Um,
No.
Marty
Megadeth
Friedman.
Megadeth is Dave Mustaine's guys. It's who he picks to be in the band, and he just picks
Seriously.
great people.
Yeah. And Dave Ellefson. But here's the thing. Um,
Good bass player, rotten human being.
Marty Friedman, there's another dude who, if you would have only listened to Marty Friedman's Cacophony days, you would, it belies the genius that lies underneath there and
Yeah,
what he has
absolutely.
become as a profoundly talented player, not just because of his speed, but his taste and his, like, he is the metal Jeff Beck. Can I just say that? He is the metal Jeff Beck. He is
I'll allow it.
he is tasteful, he is fast, he is just expressive. His technique is otherworldly. He definitely does not play like the rest of us play. If to see him play, he holds his pick in a weird position. He's very strange, but his command of the fretboard and his knowledge of especially like scales and motifs from other countries, because he's lived, like, he's actually a, I think he spent the last several decades as a Japanese citizen, fluent
Yeah.
Japanese. um
Yep.
the experience has just changed him as a guitar player, and he's really, really spectacular. Like, I just love listening to his stuff now.
Yeah. And I want to say one more thing about Pat Torpey before we move on.
Oh, okay. Mr. Torpy, rest in peace.
He's listed as a background singer on the Motley Crue album Girls, Girls, Girls. And I think we all know that means he played the drums on that album.
What? You think he played drums on that record?
I absolutely do.
Why?
What do you mean why?
Because Tommy can't play drums?
Because yeah, that was at the height of the debauchery when Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee's parts were being played by other people. Because they, not that they weren't capable of doing it,
But they were
although
just
it's
at
possible
drugs
that
and right.
yeah, they were just out of it.
Oh my God, Pat Torpey played drums on, and
Now I'm
who?
speculating. Don't sue me, anybody listen to this. I'm speculating.
Okay, well, can you speculate who might have played bass on the record?
Um, I've heard some different rumors, but mostly it's like LA session guys
Because okay.
that you never heard of, and that they paid under the table and
Hmm.
forced them to sign NDAs.
You know who played guitar on that record? Mick Mars.
Damn straight he
Yeah,
did.
you know who wasn't too drunk or coked up to play guitar was Mick Mars. That's all I'm
That's
saying.
right.
And you
That's all
done him
I'm
dirty,
saying.
Motley Crue. Not a supergroup with a murderer on vocals. How dare you?
Oh,
Where's John Corabi when you need him?
yeah, angry.
Yeah.
Um,
All right.
although,
Well, I
and
have.
you know what makes me the most mad about that situation now that we're completely off topic,
This is what we do, folks.
right? And this also pissed me off about David Lee Roth. There were some great songs on that John Corabi album,
Yeah.
and Vince Neil refused to sing any of them,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
David Lee Roth refused to sing any Hagar era Van Halen material when he was on tour with Van Halen.
Well,
Refused.
there's a good reason for that.
Well, he probably couldn't sing them, but
Right.
that always bothered me because Sammy would play the Van Halen classics
Oh
because
yeah.
he knew he was in Van Halen.
Right. Yeah.
David Lee Roth always considered that the first iteration of the David Lee Roth band.
I don't like that.
I know, I don't either.
I don't like
But
that. All
so
right.
have
So,
we you haven't gotten to your last super group. You've been putting me on hold on this because you said you had one more.
okay. Well,
So I
then,
think you throw it down and we'll end this episode and move on to music that matters.
well, because you could disqualify them. Let's find out. I think the Aristocrats with Guthrie Govan on guitar, Marco Miniman on drums, and Brian Beller on bass. I think that's a super group. How do you
I've
feel
heard
about that?
I have heard of all three of those guys.
Okay. Not super
I know.
duper famous unless you're in the circles, but I mean, at the time that the Aristocrats came out, all three of those dudes had done other things.
Yeah.
and I knew who they were.
I remember Brian Beller from playing with Dweezil Zappa in Z, the
Yep.
band that Dweezil had with his brother.
Yep.
Um, but I
And
know
he
that
worked with Steve Vai too.
he worked with Steve Vai and Mike Keneally, who also
Yep.
worked with Steve Vai. So, he's one of those guys that probably did um, more things that you never heard of than things you heard of. He's in Joe Satriani's touring band. So, he's one of those guys. He's legit.
Yeah.
And I've heard of all three of those guys,
All right,
even
good.
though I'm not familiar with the bulk of their work.
Yeah. Okay. So my super group, the Aristocrats, and that's a hint to Music That Matters, kids.